that last minute again this morning, and the welcome. I gave everyone the run through of who all was going to be presenting today in this track. And we started the day with Dr. Jeffrey Derevensky from McGill University, and we're ending the day with Dr. Gainsbury from the University of Sydney. But she is the director of the Gambling Treatment and Research Clinic and an associate professor in the School of Psychology. She's done a lot of research. She is well known in our field across the world, and we're excited to have her here to speak specifically on the convergence of gambling and gaming and how harm minimization and technology impacts are really changing in this very quickly emerging and changing field that we have. Here in Washington State this year, we now have sports wagering approved in our state for the first time. And we also have a great interest in supporting those who are working with individuals with gaming disorder as well as gambling disorder. So join me in welcoming Dr. Sally Gainsbury.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and for all of you for attending this session after hopefully a very useful day. I apologize, it's quite early here in the morning, not too bad. It's about 8:30, but I wasn't able to tune into all of the sessions. There is a time difference. You can see from my backdrop that I am in Sydney, Australia. So I couldn't resist just doing a little plug for how we celebrate the seasons down here, which is very outside. So thank you all for coming. This is a pleasure to be here. The topic I'm going to be speaking about today is very broad. So it's possible you may have some specific questions that I'm not going to cover. So please feel free to pop those in the chat, and I'll have some time for Q&A at the end. The reason it's so broad is because what was a relatively small area that started off, and I've been researching this space since, well, gambling for quite a long time, but gambling, gaming convergence, we started our first projects actually working with Professor Jeff Derevensky, who I know you've heard from already today, and I've known for a long time, and worked with directly looking at this topic of gaming and gambling and how they're coming together. And since I started doing this work in about 2012, the area has just expanded. It's become so much broader in terms of how these two, which were quite distinct areas, are increasingly crossing over. So obviously in the time period we have, I'm going to only get through a fraction of that. Today I'm going to be focusing more on gaming, gambling within games, and I'm going to touch a little bit on gaming within gambling. But if you have broader questions, please let me know, and I'm happy to go off in different areas as it suits. So as was introduced, I'm Sally Gainsbury. I'm the director of the Gambling Treatment and Research Clinic at the University of Sydney. And we're the only university-affiliated gambling treatment clinic in Australia, which does give us a great onus of both responsibility and privilege to use our research to inform treatment and use our treatment knowledge to inform our research. And we do a lot of policy relevant research to really try and inform practitioners, government, and even industry operators of how to minimize and prevent gambling harms, which is really our aim, to reduce the number of people who do need to come in seeking help by preventing and identifying those problems early on. So I've been working in this field since 2004 and have been conducting a lot of research looking at increasingly the role of technology and how it impacts gambling, the experience of gambling, and how we can then utilize technology for harm minimization purposes. So, sorry, just move that one. There we go. So what I'm going to be looking at today, a couple of key areas. Firstly, sorry about that. How are gambling and gaming converging? What the impact is on mental health. I know a lot of you do come from a treatment background, so I'm going to really try and focus on that clinical aspect, and what the impacts are of the gambling gaming convergence on treatment and prevention of problems, because I know a lot of you are active in the sort of social campaigning as well. So again, if there's anything I don't cover, feel free to pop those in the chat and we'll come back to them. So I'm just going to make sure, if you can't see that, you can move these, or maybe I need to move that. So just some questions to start off with, to think about which of these are gambling and which of these are gaming. And I know in America the term gaming is often used for gambling. I'm going to distinguish between those, gaming being not the chance-based gambling activities, but really thinking about the non-monetary activity. And I'm going to provide a definition in a minute. But what I want to do first is get you to think about which is which and how easy is it to distinguish, because it's one of those activities that we think are quite easy to tell the difference between, but there are more and more examples where this actually starts to be a little bit tricky. So 4 examples here. So the first is to pay an entry fee to compete in a game involving skill and chance with real money prizes. And I'm just going to turn my participant view on. If you want to kind of put your hand up, like your virtual hand or your real hand, if you have your video on, of whether you think this first activity, paying an entry fee to compete in games of chance, involving skill and chance with real money prizes, put your hand up if you think that is gambling. And if you can put your virtual hand up if your video is off. Okay. The next one is to pay for a randomly determined chance to win an item of value. Is that gambling?
And I'll just add, I'll let them know how to raise the virtual hand. So if you click on participants, which is the 2 little people at the bottom of your screen under the slides, it'll show a list of everybody who's attending, and then it has 3 buttons along the bottom: invite, mute me, and raise hand. So that raise hand button is how you do that virtually. And Sally, I think you should be able to see those, and yeah. I can see some other people's hands raised that way as well, if you want to do that option.
And then the third one is to pay credits to play casino games. Is that gambling? So maybe. And the last one is to bet on who is going to win a video game. So place a monetary bet. Depends. Yeah. All right, so I think what we saw there is a bit of a mixed bag in what these definitions are, which does really sort of make the point of the increasing difficulty. It's going to minimize that again now. So here are some pictures as well you can have a look at. Which of these are gambling? Visually, can we determine the difference between gambling and gaming? If we look at those, is it immediately apparent, or are there some still confusions of which is which? So these ones, these on right here, these 2 here, they're gambling, real money online gambling and real money slot machines. This is a gaming arcade and a free play casino environment. So even visually, I think, and I've been increasingly looking at the kind of the video centers that the young people go to, arcades, and they look so much like slot machines these days compared to when I was a kid. So I think that there's a lot of confusion about what is what. So now I'll give some definitions. However, I am mindful that this does vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and Washington State in particular has been known to have some difference of opinions. So gambling is generally defined, so don't quote me for every single jurisdiction, but gambling typically has 3 main characteristics. The first is you have to make a monetary payment per action. The second is the outcome has to be chance-based, at least to a significant, if not the majority extent. And the third is that there has to be a monetary or monetary value prize that is awarded after the end. Now, gambling in most jurisdictions is highly regulated. It's one of the most regulated activities. In comparison, gaming is a hugely varied area. If we kind of sat down and put our brains together, we'd probably come up with about 10 different types of gambling.
or at least groups that would capture basically most gambling activities. Gaming, on the other hand, is so varied. It's everything from a board game to mobile app-based games to complex multiplayer universes with huge time frames and dimensions, to games that for every genre you can think of: fighting games, sports games, puzzle games. It goes on and on and on. So it's hugely complex when we try and define it. There is either a mixture of skill and chance, entirely skill or entirely chance, and no set definition for that. There's typically non-monetary achievements. So you might progress, you might get rewards, and you might get storyline completion. You might have small wins, large wins, but typically there are different achievements you can receive within the game that motivates the player. And typically payment is the entry fee rather than per game. But again, that does differ. And there is no specific regulations in most jurisdictions. This is starting to change around that gaming gambling convergence area. But in most jurisdictions, games are simply something that falls under the very broad consumer protection regulations around, not deceiving players and stealing their money, things like that. So nothing too specific. So again, this sounds like, okay, that makes sense. I can tell these apart. But when you think back on some of those examples, it starts to break down to be a little bit more complex. So what does this all mean for us working in addictions and for young people? And this is a little cartoon from one of our Australian newspapers that I'll kind of use for a lighthearted point. Why would I want to double my pocket money with you when I can triple it online? The young people are increasingly active online, and this gambling gaming convergence does have a significant impact. So first of all, young people are gambling, and this isn't new. Obviously, you've heard Professor Jeff Darevensky this morning. He has been telling these stories for 15, 20 years of how important it is to address youth and adolescent gambling. And that hasn't changed. This isn't something all of a sudden new that young people are gambling. However, 42% of adolescents have gambled based on research in some form. It's more commonly amongst older teenagers, and it's more commonly amongst males, but again, that is shifting. Most gambling is relatively informal. It might be a card game, it might be informal betting, it might be lottery and scratch cards. So when you see that figure, it doesn't mean we've got sort of there's a nation of young people who are heavily involved in gambling. This is just kind of the exposure effect that's going on. These are some great, probably a bit outdated now. I haven't updated these for the ones this year, but a really good campaign to think about the importance of not exposing young people to things like lottery tickets. When I was a kid, my mum did stuff scratchies into the Christmas bonbon or crackers. But it's not appropriate to be gifting lottery and other gambling products to young people. And this is a really important campaign that I'm glad to see is continuing. But technology is changing. So when I say young people have been gambling, this is true, but technology is changing the extent to which young people can access and what they're accessing as well. It's no longer simply that young people can play sort of a toy roulette game in their backyard. They'll now be able to access complex gambling products and gaming products online that have a reduced differentiation between the two. Now, internet gambling, the number one way people become aware of it is through family influences. So if we think about what the family looks like, and I hate to think what the COVID situation and lockdown has done to increase this, obviously we are a highly connected society and devices are an increasingly normal part of children's life, if not directly involved. Then seeing parents and elders and elder siblings use their devices. And that's one of the big changes that internet gambling has changed, that it used to be an activity that people would engage in out of the house and maybe talk about it in the house. But now it's possible that young people are being exposed directly observing their parents engaged in online gambling. So we do know that parental gambling and early age of onset are two of the most reliable predictors of a youth eventually developing gambling themselves and potentially developing problems. And again, obviously, this doesn't mean that every child who observes gambling is going to end up having problems, but it is a known predictor. So what is going on? So when we look at online gambling, the research suggests that 22% of adolescents have gambled online in the past year, which is pretty high. And again, this depends on how adolescents obviously answer this question and define this, but this is using questions that asks about gambling for money. Now, obviously, young people are exposed to advertising. These are a couple of different ads that you can see really tap in when I talk about those, like those males in particular, sort of the glamorization of gambling, sexualization of gambling, making it seem quite desirable. And offshore gambling sites may have no age gates. It might simply have a statement somewhere that you must be 18 or 21 to play, or tick a box. I've seen some examples where you enter a birth date. If you enter a birth date that makes you too young, it says, are you sure? You realize you have to be this old to play? Do you want to enter this birth date instead? So, there are a lot of ways for young people to access gambling sites. And there are 241 different payment methods that are obviously everything from major credit cards to using a 7-Eleven voucher or a myriad of different e-wallets that can be funded to pay for gambling. So there's, for someone that really wants to gamble and has some relatively access purposes, it's not particularly difficult for young people to engage in this behavior. So I'm going to kind of step through a few different ways of gambling gaming convergence. So bear with me on the ride. And again, I'm not going to cover everything, but I'll try and touch on a few main points. We've obviously seen this major technological transformation of gambling in general. So while we're seeing more gaming in gambling, we're also seeing more gambling in gaming, and the two products are becoming less different over time. As you can see here on the right, where you're now using touch screens and graphics have become a lot more sophisticated, sounds, lights, that interactive element has really advanced. And we also have things like social play and competitive play in them as well. A much more sophisticated device with, curved screens, ergonomic seating, joysticks, compared to a traditional pull-down slot machine. So these are a few emerging technologies, and I'm not going to get into these ones. It's probably a whole nother presentation, which I'm happy to give. It's a different point. But I often talk about the emerging technology for gambling, and these are things like virtual reality. So you can see the top image here is playing a slot machine with dinosaurs wandering around. That one's pretty cool. Augmented reality, think Pokemon Go, but for gambling, where you're using your mobile phone to kind of have a changed reality or an enhanced reality while you're in a physical setting. Skill-based gambling, I am going to give you some definitions of. Fantasy sports, I think, again, is warrant of almost a whole presentation in and of itself. And I'm sure you're familiar with this, that's, picking a team based on actual sporting events. And this was something that was quite a skill-based activity when it was a season long. Now that it's a daily or a very quick event, it's looking a lot more like gambling, is regulated as gambling in several jurisdictions. And then skins betting I'll touch on as well. So I'm going to show you a little bit about skill-based gambling machines, because this is something that I have specifically done some research on. And so I've got some videos here, because everyone loves a video, for anyone not familiar. So I'll just run you through some examples of a few different.
So I just loaded in the game. This is our bet menu where I can choose my bet amount. As I choose the bet amount, it updates on the screen. So it tells me what my payouts are. That we have a fixed pay table. So if I take out 6 or more bots, I'm in the money. 10, I get 25 times my bet. So I'll go ahead and play a game for $10, hit play. The way the gameplay works is I have 45 seconds to take out as many robots as possible. So I'm in a new map and I'm trying to take out as many danger bots as possible. And I'm just about to luck out because I just got a power up.
So you can see there's still like a random element. It depends on what map you get, what random advantages you receive. So there's still an underlying random element, but there's a skill involved that can increase your outcomes.
Kill a robot, it shows up on the score.
Exactly. So as I engage and take out the robots, it updates on score here. Once I get to 5, 6 robots, I'm in the money. 10 robots for the highest payout.
Three different goals and challenges. Kill 30 zombies with a submachine gun, kill 30 zombies, and vault 3 fences.
And you can see there the prizes are still relatively low. And that's because the overall jackpots are still determined by chance. So this is just augmenting your ability to win. There's still, everyone can technically still win even amounts.
I've seen this before. It's pretty easy to just kind of jump in and play. So basically my controls are left and right, and then I have control over firing. And you can see I've got a little guard dog there running. He's going to be taking out guys for me.
But obviously the look and feel is very different from what we think about with a slot machine.
So I'm going to show you how you play. You need to hop through without landing somewhere that is
More of an arcade style.
And you want to collect coins along
And so
the way.
this one, you can see then it's not all about just sort of getting young people who are familiar with video games. This one is going for more of a retro appeal of older adults interested in these games as well. So it's not all about just getting millennials.
One wheel.
And there's a completely random determination here.
I got 4 credits.
So there's these real mix of underlying chance-based scenario, but some skill on top. So I've done some research with Khalil Philander from Washington State University, where we showed these videos to a range of consumers. And what we found was that consumers don't have a great understanding of how these new machines work. However, they also don't understand how slot machines work. So that was a really important comparison to demonstrate that there's still high levels of misperceptions of skill involved in slot machines. So the skill-based gambling machines aren't actually as inaccurate with their distortions as you would think, given the fact that people just fundamentally don't understand slot machines in the first place. However, the people who were more likely to play the skill gaming machines, and this was in the end of 2018, and there was only a few jurisdictions that had these available in the US, which is where we surveyed our sample from, they were more likely to have higher levels of cognitive distortions. They were more likely to experience illusions of control. They were younger and more interested in mobile games, and they had existing gambling problems. So it does suggest these games are potentially initially appealing to a group of quite involved consumers who potentially do have gambling problems. So that's one example of how gaming is being incorporated into gambling. And now I'm going to talk through a little bit about how I'm getting myself confused, how gambling is being incorporated into online, social, and mobile games. And I'm sure none of this will be new to you all, but there are these broad variety of what are classified as social casino games. And these are typically mobile app-based, but you can play on a desktop. They're often integrated with a Facebook or social media site, and they are themed on gambling activities. So they might be casino or slot or poker or blackjack, and they're free to play. So when you log in and create an account, you get a certain amount of chips to play. And then when you do run out of those chips, you can either wait 24 hours or you can make a purchase. Say you might spend $5 or $10 and receive, $20,000 worth of chips, but you can buy packages up to, $150, $200. So you can spend money in these games. However, there is no way to take money out of the game. So the chips have no real world redemption value. So you can see some ads here, and it really gets into the fact that the gaming industry has not put a lot of credence or thought into prevention or consumer protection. This one's sold as your new addiction. And the idea for gaming industry is often to try and get time on device, more sticky, more money. How do we transfer the people to make them into whales? That's a high spending player. So this is the whole kind of motivation of the gaming industry, is really to hook people in. And success is when someone's playing your game for as much physical time as possible, spending as much time, as much money That's the monetization model of games. So it's quite different from even the approach of the gambling companies, who are aware of the corporate social responsibility requirements, even if only for the legal and compliance aspects. There's very limited awareness of that within most gaming industries, although obviously this is shifting somewhat. I'll just say as well, from a consumer perspective, now these are obviously different from gambling because you don't have to pay. You don't have to demonstrate your identity. However, from a looks and feels perspective, the research we've done suggests that most people feel like they are quite similar, if not very similar, to a gambling experience. So from the consumer perspective, there's increasingly less of a distinction between these two activities, gambling and gaming, depending on how focused people are on that monetary outcome. But in some instances, the social casino games are actually manufactured by the same companies that make slot machines. In fact, I've got a graph, I don't think I have it in this presentation, of the increasing proportion of the social casino market that's actually owned by gaming machine manufacturers, as a way to increase their engagement with the market, and increasingly as a sole source of revenue as well, because these styles of games are one of, if not the highest grossing genre of games, which means that they're not always the most popular, or they are regularly quite popular in terms of all mobile games, but they are typically, this genre of games make more money per player than any other style of games. So there does seem to be a lot of people who are quite willing to pay for the experience. And as been said here by Tanya, that they're not regulated as gambling. So they're absolutely not regulated in any way, shape or form, other than the general consumer protection laws. So a couple of other ways that gambling has been predominantly placed within video games. One, the picture on the right is not new at all. Gambling within games as kind of a way to earn credit within that game. This is a picture from Red Dead Redemption, where you sit down as a player to play a slot machine or credits to kind of earn more virtual credits to use within the game. And this has been around for a long period of time. It's a kind of a boring thing to do within a video game, but it's a way to kind of churn through, get some more credits. It's just an extra activity, but it's increasingly being incorporated into different games. So I think that, for example, there are an increasing proportion of games that have a gaming sort of casino style element within them. And then the next you'll probably be familiar with as well, which is loot boxes. So loot boxes are based on again, not entirely new. It's essentially a mystery box. However, in this case, you pay for the privilege of accessing the mystery box. So you can see this example here. You can purchase 5, 11, 24 or 50 loot boxes, and there's a different pay scale to make it more enticing to purchase more. They're typically around $1 or $2 per box, varies per game, and it also varies what they look like. I'll show you another example of where they're a card pack. But essentially, you don't know what's in the box. It might be something of use within the game. It might be something of value. It might be a character enhancement or actually give you a competitive advantage. Or it might be something that is a useless item that you have a million of and it doesn't help you at all. So you don't know what's in there. So you're paying real money for a chance to win something that might help you within the game. And then the kicker is that for some of these games, there's virtual online marketplaces where you can buy, sell, trade these items for real money. So, and then there's black market or unregulated marketplaces where you can actually buy, sell, trade them for real money cash. So here's where we really start to think this is starting to meet a few more of those elements we need to classify it as gambling. And there are several jurisdictions that are looking pretty closely at this. So I'll just show you an image here.
There we go. Blue box numero uno. What do we got? We got a perp, and it's nothing but sprays. So the archives logo is just behind everything. Moving on, next loot box. Please giveth me thine good loot, please. Oh, look at that. What do we got? Gold. What do we got? Give me the Hanzo. Oh, that is actually a really cool skin. Oh, I love these.
Anyway, so there's actually, if you YouTube, there's a whole now genre of YouTube clips of people just opening loot boxes again. So this isn't a hugely profitable new, well, not so new now, but hugely profitable revenue source for gaming companies of how they are now monetizing their video games, is people paying for loot boxes.
There we go.
So I'll show you this little video as well, because I think this is my last one, so bear with me, but this is a good one to show. And this clip has been pulled, so you might be able to find it online still. But this was a trailer, a pre-release of a new game. I think it was the beginning of this year or the end of last year that was pulled. And this is the voiceover is not the actual voiceover of the trailer. This is someone online who has put their own voice to this little video clip.
So here we are, NBA 2K20 My Team, which is rated in the corner there for ages 3 and up by Peggy. Oh, there's a loot box straight away. How exciting for us all. So yeah, look at all the little stickery cardy bollockses you can find in there. There's a bit of the basketball game. So I can't wait to see what teams are in it, what kind of physics they're up. Oh, wait, hold on. No, we're back to loot boxes. Okay. Cool. We've got new evolution cards. How exciting. It moves very quickly. Lots of pretty colours and dazzling lights to entertain and amuse us. None of this is gambling, by the way. I want to point out that none of this loot box, none of these randomised mechanics, none of these gambling-inspired mechanics are gambling. It's like EA always says, it's surprise mechanics, and I'm very surprised by what I'm seeing. Oh, that looks like a random game of chance. You kind of see that at a fun fair, at a carnival, though. It's not necessarily gambling. I mean, you're wagering money for a prize, but it's not necessarily gambling. Oh, there's a slot machine. Well, then that's that, isn't it? There it is. There it is. And a little spinny wheel as well. Because none of this is gambling.
Anyway, so that goes on to become a little bit more fruity in the language, so I'll call it there. But again, this was pulled because there was, obviously surprisingly to the company, not so surprisingly to potentially some people on the call, a lot of backlash on the extent of surprise mechanics using the parlance of gaming industry within this game. So they did rejig this game before the actual release of it. So some degree of informing gaming industry based on that. So the last thing is this gambling with virtual items. So taking these loot boxes and cashing them in. And you can actually now, again, with offshore sites, although there has been a big crackdown on this, take your virtual items that you've won within games directly to a casino style site and use them as a currency. So one of those 241 different payment mechanisms. So what does all of this mean? This is a billboard poster, Gambling Starts with Games, from Adelaide in South Australia. And this was a campaign by the Premier's office to try and discourage parents from letting their children engage with gambling. It was pulled. The gaming industry had some issues with this, which is fair enough, because this is the gaming industry is much broader than just loot boxes and social casino games. There are a lot of, great games, and gaming also has some really positive and research-backed positive impacts for young people. So this is not a campaign to demonize gaming as a genre or an activity in general. And I do think that's quite important because we know that fear-based campaigns don't work. We know that just telling young people don't do this, it's just not an effective strategy, and it's actually not useful. There are a lot of really positive benefits from young people engaging in gaming, particularly when the families and parents are involved with it. So what I'm focusing on here is really that gambling theme and mechanics within games. And these are some of, I'm going to step through these different concerns and the research that we do have around them. So the first is the concern that inflated payouts increase perception of winning. And so what we know from our research is that when the games have inflated payouts, now unlike gambling, obviously there is no cost to paying out. So it's not a minimum return to player. It's a variable payout. You can win more often if you're a new player or if you haven't won in a while. The games can change it constantly of how likely you are to win. So you're more likely to win than you would in a gambling activity. Now, but because the gambling and gaming activities look so similar, this inflated payout can actually lead young people to think they're more likely to win within an actual gambling activity. And then some good research by Daniel King and Professor Paul Del Fabro showed that after young people played a gambling themed game, they went on to have greater confidence and risk taking in an actual gambling activity. So there is this impact on later on gambling after you've had this experience of win, 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 and gold coins and money being thrown at you and having a good ranking. And we did have research that showed that amongst the people who moved from social casino games to gambling in a sample of adolescents, 33% thought they had a greater chance of winning at gambling due to their experience on the social casino games. So it does have this long-lasting cognitive impact. And this is related to the fact that social casino games look so similar to gambling sites that of the teens we surveyed, 90% thought that the social casino games looked similar to gambling, and that they do have this real focus on winning and on cash and money. Even though there is no actual monetary value, they're very focused on this monetary access. So this is one quote from one of our survey participants: "I can just learn and then see how I go. And if I like it, well, I can go and do it for real." So they are actually using this as a bit of a training ground, which arguably for poker, perhaps is not a completely irrational strategy. Although certainly the people you're playing against on free money sites are very different from the people who are going to be playing against on the poker sites. But for pretty much everything else, there's not much value in practicing a casino game. So again, the games are very much set up as a social activity, as a skill-based activity. There's leaderboards, there's chat features, there's social engagement. So it's really sort of fun, focusing on progression and activity and access, which is setting up this perception that gambling is skill-based and that you can have, rankings and your previous outcome is related to your next outcome. So it's really encouraging what we already know are quite common misperceptions of gambling amongst young people. So even the people that don't go on necessarily as an adolescent to move into gambling from gaming, it's potentially concerning that these young people are building up these perceptions that gambling that are in an inaccurate fashion. So when we look specifically about which young people move from gaming to gambling, most people, and this is really important to know, most people reported no impact on their gambling. So they hadn't gambled or had any impact on their gambling as a result of the games. However, 18% of the teens we surveyed, and this was actually a little while ago now, so this was from 2015, they reported increased gambling as a result of social casino games, and 28% reported having gambled as a result. So they had actually gone and migrated to gambling. And the three main reasons were to win real money, for the excitement, and for the challenge of real money gambling. So this is another quote: "I just decided if I'm going to do that, I might as well play online slots with real money." And one of the real kickers with this is once someone starts to pay for the chips that they're playing with, that's when the distinction between the games starts to completely break down, that now they're paying money, but they're not winning. Well, if I'm going to pay money, shouldn't I just go to a site where I could potentially win real money back? So that pay to play mechanism is quite problematic. And that's what we have found. And this is based on research from my lab. This is based on research from Professor Michael Wall's lab at Carleton University as well, that in-game payments can be really problematic. That the reason people play is to relieve the stress potentially, and the purchases increase their enjoyment. However, then the payments start to normalize that spending, increase the similarity with gambling, and increase the salience of rewards, because now you're seeing that cash pop back up, but you can't actually do anything with it. You've paid real money, but you can't cash out. And that's when this seems to start becoming quite a mechanism towards the in-game payments, which is all the more reason the gaming companies push people to make a payment. Even if it's 50 cents, that first payment, it just kind of breaks the ice into making more and more payments. Now, that's been kind of these are the negatives, but it's really important to keep a broad perspective that the impact of social casino games on problems does vary. So for some people, for young people, they might think, why would I pay when I actually play the game for free. So we did actually find that 9% of teams decreased how much they gambled, and 15% decreased how much they wanted to gamble. So for some young people, these games might have a really positive effect. We know that one of the reasons that young people engage in gambling is for curiosity, for a little bit of risk taking, to see what it's like. Now, if a young person can play a game to tick those same boxes and not migrate over to real money gambling sites, or even if they are paying $1, $5, that's going to have a less significant outcome than them trying to go to a casino or a real money gambling site. So there potentially are some positives of these social casino games if they are used in an appropriate way, or kind of scratching that itch for some people that they go, actually, this is really boring. I don't want to do this anymore. But for other people, they might think, why would I play for free when I can win real money? So there's this double-sided coin. Now, those people are the minority, but obviously that's problematic if it's having a long-lasting impact. So we have to be mindful of the impact of both things. And briefly from the adult literature as well, I have actually spoken to clinicians that have used these games as a way to wean people off gambling opportunities, because even if they're still spending money, they're usually spending a lot less money than they would if they were on a real money site. So I'm certainly not trying to demonize this whole industry or necessarily even the social casino games, but it is important to look at those perspectives. All right, so I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions, but I'm going to quickly touch on the impact of gaming and gambling convergence on clinical services. And I kind of like this image. So firstly, gaming and gambling problems may be linked. And here's a PSA that looks at, this idea of gaming disorder, which has been identified and classified as a mental health disorder now. So gaming can be problematic. We know this. Problem gambling is linked with gambling within games. So there's increasing amount of research that demonstrates an association. Those who purchase microtransactions and loot boxes are more likely to have gambling problems. Pardon me, but we have no causal evidence still. So it's possible and likely the people interested in gambling are also interested in these transactions and mechanics, and would have gone on to gamble anyway. But we really don't know whether it's accelerating the trajectory or pushing people there that wouldn't have otherwise gone on to gamble. But still, there's increasing evidence of a problem there. The mental health implications for gambling and gaming. So gaming disorder has been diagnosed as a behavioral addiction. And I've got some quotes here from some research. One was the one on the left here. We did a qualitative study with youth professionals in Australia, so people who worked with young people, and asked them whether whether gaming problems were an issue. And we interviewed a range of people, from teachers to counselors to homeless service workers. This is one of the quotes. We used to have some clients who are constantly playing games. They're unable to get their access their normal life, their daily life routines, attend their appointments, attend their welfare appointments, job searches, things like that. They left with no money. So this gaming is really disrupting the life activity. And then this one from the qualitative study we did with individuals involved in gaming, saying it's just the saddest thing. Going on holidays with my family, the main thing I'm concerned about is whether I'm going to have Wi-Fi. Will I be able to play my game? It's so ridiculous. So the fact that this is really disrupting this is gaming disrupting their entire life. So gambling disorder and gaming disorder are both classified as behavioral addictions. They have common comorbidities. So similarly with depression, anxiety, ADHD, and alcohol use disorder. They both have physical impacts and psychological impacts as well: stress, sedentary behavior, eating and sleeping disruptions, and have a lack of engagement with other activities and relationships. So there are some similarities between gambling and gaming disorders, but we really don't have a good understanding of the relationship between gambling and gaming. There's some research that shows they're related. There's some research that doesn't find an overlap. They're both based on the same kind of mechanisms, which come from alcohol use disorder. So maybe there's kind of a circle logic there where we're defining them and then coming back and saying, well, now they're similar. So that I think that it's just important to be mindful of that lack of good understanding at the moment. But regardless, I think the real world harms are really apparent. So you can see this image here of, come back in the house and get out of the house, like how parents and youth are really impacted by gambling and gaming. That we do need more resources in education, and that there's a lack of clarity, at least so in Australia, we don't have any funding for providing or addressing gaming related harms, because it doesn't, the gambling activity is all funded from the gambling industry and from levies and taxations and government departments, but there is no government department that's responsible for gaming problems. So, who has this responsibility? Is it just part of a general health portfolio? Is it mental health? Is it related to gaming or gambling? And we don't have good research really on, there's lots underway. So it certainly is a really fast growing field, but we still need to do more to understand it. In terms of at-risk groups, there are a couple of groups that we do recognize as at risk. So this is adolescents and young adults do appear to have higher rates of gaming disorder. Obviously, people who engage with gaming, people with existing gambling problems, comorbid psychological difficulties, and gaming does appear in some prevalent studies to be more prevalent amongst culturally diverse backgrounds, particularly from an Asian heritage. So actions to protect game users, looking at actually putting limits on gambling content and in-game purchasing for young people, warnings, and preventing links between gambling and gaming where we can, and public education for parents, for youth professionals to be aware of having these conversations. From a treatment point of view, there haven't been a lot of validations of how to actually treat gaming problems, and there's little evidence of treatment outcomes. So do we simply take a gambling treatment and kind of apply it? What's the best referral pathway? How do we capture people and direct them to treatment? Where do we direct them to? CBT has the best evidence so far of the very limited studies that we know. Behavioral adaptations, some jurisdictions use kind of a boot camp style, which I don't think is particularly effective. But I do think that increasingly when I'm talked about this, I often find myself in being pushed in the role of kind of a family clinician, which is, part of my training, but not necessarily my expertise. But a lot of the time when we say, okay, your 16-year-old is gaming nonstop and they won't listen to you and they won't do their homework, you got to think, well, what's happened to get to this point? Like, what are the family dynamics? What else is going on with this young person? And importantly, that we can't just restrict young people because gaming and online activities are going to be part of their lives. We really need to involve the young person and get them to be empowered to be able to set appropriate boundaries, to understand critically how to regulate their own behavior. It simply can't be parental restrictions. That's not going to solve the problem for a particularly long period of time. So we've got to look at what's the dynamics, how do we engage the young people once they're an appropriate age to start to self-regulate. And really thoroughly screen for comorbid disorders and issues, and make sure there's lots of referrals between support services. So I've got some discussion questions here. Hopefully you all have questions as well. My email address I'll pop up again before we get to the end. But what I'd love to do is open up for some questions from as many of you that have questions. You can pop them in the chat. You can turn yourself off mute, whatever you like. But I've left a few minutes. Hopefully that's been of interest. Thank you for letting me share my thoughts with you. And I'd love to hear any thoughts from all of you as well.
Hi, Sally. This is Julie Hines from Oregon. Enlightening as always. Thank you so very much for this information. My curiosity has to do with COVID-19 and young people just spending more time. Obviously, they're spending more time online and engaged with games overall. Is there been any research that you've been aware of with regard to effects yet of the pandemic on gaming?
I'm not as across all gaming literature in and of itself where it's not related to gambling, so I can't hand on heart say whether that there isn't, because I'm not aware of it. I know that there have been quite a few gambling studies, including myself. I've led a multi-wave gambling study. So we have seen a shift to more people engaged in online gambling. And I would be pretty surprised if we haven't seen a similar shift to more people engaged in gaming. What we don't know is the long-lasting impact of as restrictions ease or as people kind of adapt or get bored of these things. So I think we need to be mindful of when there is a bump with this huge change in life, whether that's going to continue or whether people are going to kind of get that out of their system. We know that lots of people have been doing all sorts of different things as they're obviously forced online. So what we need to look at is how much of that transition is permanent and the impact that will have for young people. But I would be pretty sure that there have been an increase in young people accessing online activities because that's been really the only thing that we can access at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Allison Drain, Prevention Coordinator in North Carolina. Really enjoyed this presentation, and I've constantly reading your work all the time. So thank you for what you do. And I just want to, from a prevention standpoint, what advice do you have for prevention coordinators in problem gambling and how to start incorporating more prevention efforts in gaming?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I've started from my point of view with youth professionals. So I've been involved with our state government in running a series of workshops for a broad sector of youth professionals that we typically don't engage with gambling. So looking at addiction counselors, homeless workers, youth services, teachers, mental health support agencies, the whole broad field, and then even going beyond that if it's not youth, so social services, legal aid, financial counselors, and to start to train these individuals. Because for me, that's the best way to reach people who are experiencing problems with any range of issues. We know that it's most likely someone will go to support for a non-gambling specific service, even GPs and nurses. So the more people in the community in a supporting role, whether, including teachers that are going to be there at the cold face to be able to identify, detect, and have those conversations. The reasons people don't have those conversations at a professional level is they don't know about it. One thing, awareness. They don't feel confident to talk about it, and they don't know what to do with it. So if someone discloses a problem and they say, well, but I don't know who to refer to or what to do or how to help you, they're not confident to have that conversation. So for me, it's about training as the first protocol. Is what I would do is to be increasing the awareness and knowledge of the professional workforce so that they can start to identify, okay, there's like a family issue going on here. Ask the question, is there gaming? Is there gambling? If the more those questions are asked, the screening is there, even a most simplistic way of just one question screening, which then you can follow up on. And then the knowledge, okay, well, here's the service that can help you. Here's the next step. That's going to start to get the first big group of people, which are those already presenting for help. That's going to be the biggest win for me before you then start to train every single, parent, teacher out there, because the vast majority of people are engaged in gaming and it's not at a problematic level. So to get the people who are experiencing problems and getting support for other issues and training up the professionals, I think is a really critical step to start getting referrals. And then once that's got to a really good level, we can start doing a broader campaigns, because I think there is a real risk of potentially demonizing this and having this kind of campaign against gaming just in general, confusing people, and parents frankly have enough to worry about. And gaming is going to probably fall relatively low on their list of priorities. The kids at home, the kids safe, they're not using drugs, they're not being cyberbullied, or maybe they are, but you've got it. So I think you've got to go to try and get people where the problems are most likely to be as a first port of call while we're building up knowledge and awareness of these issues.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you.
So, for example, we've been running webinars. We were doing in-person training before, obviously COVID, but webinars. And I think, as you all know, people in social services are usually can't get enough of webinars. Like everyone loves training and professional education. So, organizing some webinars, getting more people in. I think there's just so many benefits of having referrals between services and knowledge of what different services do. So that would be my easy tip. And you don't have to be an expert to give a webinar. You can kind of, put some slides up and have a conversation. If you've got services to refer to, I think that's really key, giving people an action point. Any other questions or comments? I'd love to hear if anyone has any experience they'd like to share about their efforts in gaming.
This is Allison Drain again. I actually just had a mother call me yesterday to tell me that her son came to her and told her he was addicted to social casino games. So we are just starting childhood treatment of problem gambling in North Carolina. And luckily we had a provider on the adult side that also works with a lot of youth. So we were able to refer him through. But yeah, the conversation of, are we going to reimburse something if it's a game when there is gambling, characteristics within it? Are we going to do that? And how are we going to market the child treatment path? But yeah, that happened just yesterday. So it just came to me as, we know it's happening, and then I wonder what's happening with COVID-19, and it just became super real to me even more yesterday.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, from my experience, we're only funded for adults. So we refer all young people to a more general mental health service. But even then, we're not technically funded for anything gaming. So if a problem was something like loot boxes or social casino games, we could probably make a case to the funding body. But the other thing, this is obviously, a gambling specific forum, but a lot of gaming disorder, it doesn't have anything to do with gambling, and it might be money, but it's much broader than that. So there are a lot of cases where it's not a gambling problem kind of looking like a gaming problem, or a gaming problem looking like a gambling problem. Gaming disorder is a much broader field than loot boxes and social casino games. So I think that it's going to be an important issue. And it's similar to sort of social media or other technology related problems, which aren't diagnosable or even classified as behavioral addictions, but nonetheless present real problems and issues for the people and families experiencing those that don't have a dedicated treatment pathway. So I think it's going to be looking at those comorbidities and training up people who do provide more generalist mental health services to be able to see clients with those problems.
Sally, can't thank you enough. You just spoke to the lack of funding and lack of acknowledgement, where up here in the province I am in Canada, ministries are busy going, no, that's that category. No, we fund to treat this. No, that goes over there. And then we have this giant hole in the middle where so many of our young people, young adults, and their families have nowhere to turn to. I appreciate the first steps, because on that around webinars for professionals and you've just given me a 1, 2, 3 plan on how to proceed to try and get this rolling with your cousins up in Canada. So I thank you for your time. Very valuable.
Thank you so much, Karen. That's wonderful to hear. And my details are here. And if I can be of use, and this presentation will be available, I guess, to download or access. So look, if I can be of help to anyone in their efforts, I'm very happy to, you've got my email address. This is something I think we're looking at as a global issue. And if we can share resources and help one another, for me, it'd be a big win to have even one more jurisdiction where ministers or someone in a position of power can make a change. So please feel free to share these. And I'm glad you like the videos. I love showing videos. I think they make it quite real, as opposed to just trying to describe what these things look like. There's a lot of them online, so just go YouTube crazy. Any last questions? We're coming towards the end of the hour. Well, I'll leave you to your afternoon. Thank you for listening and for your engagement and questions. And I'm sure I'll speak with some of you via email or Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever your particular communication method is. But I know you've probably had a long day, so I'll leave you to digest and happy to send a PDF of the slides to anyone who's interested.
And I will just add that for all of the presentations where the presenter is okay with us sharing their slide deck as a PDF, we will link those to the training website.
Have a great day, everybody.